My name is Hiroo Onoda. I was born in Japan in 1922, in a time when honor was more valuable than life itself. I grew up in a small village surrounded by rice paddies, forests, and the sound of cicadas in the summer. My father was a proud man, a samurai at heart. He told me that a man's duty was to serve his emperor, to die with honor, and to never bring shame to his name. Those words carved themselves deep into my soul. When the war began, Japan called upon its sons. And I answered. I joined the Imperial Japanese Army as a young intelligence officer. I was trained in psychological warfare and guerrilla tactics, how to survive alone, how to disrupt the enemy from the shadows. They taught me, you are the blade of the Emperor. You will not die in vain. You will never surrender. I believed every word. By 1944, Japan was losing ground. The war was turning against us. But my orders were clear. I was to go to the Philippine island of Lubon. My mission, sabotage enemy operations, gather intelligence, and prepare the island for Japan's eventual return. Before I left, my commander said something I never forgot. Onoda, no matter what happens, you are forbidden to die by your own hand. Hold the island until we return, even if it takes years. I saluted him, proud and ready. I had no idea those words would define the next 3 decades of my life. So we waited, in the jungle, with our rifles, our loyalty unbroken. I did not know it yet, but I had already stepped out of time. The war for me had just begun, and would not end for 30 years. The war was supposed to last weeks, maybe months. But in the jungle, time loses its shape. Days melt into nights. Seasons pass like whispers. When we first realized the Japanese troops had left the Philippines, we thought it was a temporary withdrawal. We believed the empire was regrouping, that soon the rising sun would return. So we waited. Every dawn, we performed inspection, rifles polished, boots cleaned, duty rosters assigned. Even in the heart of the jungle, far from command, we were still soldiers of the emperor. We built shelters deep inside the forest, camouflaged with bamboo and palm leaves. We hunted wild pigs and gathered coconuts. When our supplies ran low, we raided the nearby villages at night, taking rice and salt. Sometimes the locals shouted at us in Tagalog, waving papers and calling out that the war was over. We never believed them. We thought they were enemy collaborators sent to confuse us. One night, they dropped another set of leaflets from planes. This time it was clearer. Official seals, Japanese writing, even the emperor's signature. Still, I couldn't believe. How could the emperor surrender? How could a nation built on honor, the spirit of Bushido, simply give up? It was unthinkable. So, we burned the leaflets again, and we carried on. In those early years, my small unit still believed in purpose. We trained every day, patrolled the island's edges, and gathered reports of enemy activity. When villagers came near, we retreated into the trees. When gunfire echoed, we fired back. Sometimes farmers died, caught between our fear and our faith. We justified it by saying they were enemies in disguise, because to admit we were wrong would mean our whole lives had lost meaning. I remember Corporal Shimada, strong, disciplined, loyal to the end. He would polish his rifle as if preparing for inspection. He used to tell me, "Lieutenant, the Emperor has not abandoned us. He will come." And I nodded, because I wanted to believe it too. But the jungle was changing us. The longer we stayed, the more it swallowed our minds. The green walls became our world. The outside world became legend. The first tragedy struck in 1950. Private Akatsu, the youngest among us, couldn't take it anymore. He told us he wanted to leave, to find the Japanese forces, to confirm the truth. I warned him, "Akatsu, if you surrender, you betray the mission. You betray Japan." But he left anyway. Months later, we found leaflets with his name on them, pleading with us to come out, saying Japan had surrendered years ago. We refused to believe it. We said the Americans must have captured him and forced him to write those lies. I told my men, "Stay sharp. The enemy grows clever." And so, we stayed hidden even deeper in the mountains. Years turned into decades. Our uniforms tattered. Our rifles rusted, but still worked. Our hair grew long. Our faces lean and hollow. We became ghosts, shadows moving through the jungle. Sometimes we saw fires from the villages, heard laughter, music. We called it enemy propaganda. We told ourselves that the Americans were using Filipino actors to trick us into surrendering. We stopped talking about home. We stopped talking about time. We had only one truth left: obedience. Then, in 1954, Shimada was shot during a skirmish with local police. We carried him back into the jungle, tried to save him, but his wound was too deep. He looked at me and whispered, "Lieutenant, we held our ground. Don't let our mission die." I buried him beneath the palms, his rifle across his chest, and saluted him. I promised that as long as I breathed, the Emperor's order would not be broken. That day, I became the last officer of a forgotten war. Only Kozuka and I remained, two soldiers against time itself. We hunted, we hid, we fought shadows. Every year, the jungle claimed more of us, our strength, our youth, our sanity. Still, I refused to surrender, because surrender was not in my blood, and death was not yet permitted. The jungle had become my home, my battlefield, my destiny. I did not know it yet, but I would live there, still fighting, until the world itself came to find me. By the time the 1960s came, I no longer knew what year it was. I had stopped counting. The jungle didn't care about calendars or wars or nations. It only cared about survival. Each sunrise was the same. Mist over the mountains, the smell of damp leaves, the faint cries of birds. Each night, the same darkness, thick and endless, swallowing every sound except the ones inside your mind. I had been a soldier for so long that I no longer remembered what it meant to be anything else. Only Kozuka remained by my side. He was more than a comrade now. He was my brother. We hunted together, patched our uniforms with palm fibers, and shared stories from our old lives. Though, over time, those memories began to feel like dreams. Sometimes at night, we would sit by a fire, whispering so no one could hear. He would say, "Lieutenant, maybe the war really is over." I would answer, "If the war were over, Japan would have come for us. Until they do, our orders stand." And he would nod, because what else could we believe? Over the years, we saw airplanes again, civilian planes, flying too high for us to recognize. We told ourselves they were enemy reconnaissance missions. Once we found a transistor radio left behind by a patrol. We listened to it for hours. Voices in Japanese, news of the Tokyo Olympics, even pop songs. For a moment, I almost believed it was real. But then I heard an announcer mention post-war Japan. Post-war, I thought. Propaganda. The enemy grows cleverer each year. I smashed the radio. We had become relics of a world that no longer existed. When we raided farms for food, people screamed and ran. We didn't see civilians. We saw enemy soldiers in disguise. In 1969, police ambushed us near a rice paddy. Bullets tore through the air. We escaped into the jungle, but Kozuka was hit in the leg. I carried him for miles through the mud until we found shelter. I used bamboo and old rags to dress his wound, just as the manuals had taught us. He survived that night, but his spirit began to fade. Years passed again, and then, one morning in 1972, Kozuka and I were near the village, burning rice stores as part of what we still called sabotage missions. The villagers fought back. Gunfire broke out. When the smoke cleared, I was alone. Kozuka lay motionless on the ground, shot dead 28 years after the war had ended. I buried him beside a river under a canopy of palms. I removed his dog tags and placed them on his chest. Then I stood over his grave and saluted. For the first time in my life, I cried. I cried because I had lost my last brother, and because I was starting to understand that maybe, just maybe, the war I've been fighting all this time was over. But duty is stronger than doubt. I remember my commander's words. "You are forbidden to die by your own hand. You will hold the island until we return." So I stayed, alone. For 2 more years, I lived like a ghost. I moved at night, slept by day. I repaired my uniform, kept my rifle clean. I wrote reports on imaginary enemy movements, as if someone might one day read them. Sometimes I spoke to the jungle. Sometimes I heard voices in the wind. My commander, Kozuka, my father. Maybe they were real. Maybe they were memories. All I knew was that I couldn't surrender. Not yet. Not without orders. And then, in 1974, I heard something impossible. A voice, Japanese, young, human, calling out into the jungle. It was not an order, not a command. It was curious. The man shouted, "Onoda-san, Onoda Hiroo, the war is over. Japan has been at peace for 29 years. At first, I thought it was another trap, but the voice returned again and again for days, until finally curiosity overcame caution, and I stepped out of the shadows to meet him. His name was Norio Suzuki, a traveler, not a soldier. He told me he had come to find Lieutenant Onoda, a panda, and the abominable snowman, in that order. I thought he was insane, but he spoke Japanese like home. He smiled like a friend, and he showed me photographs of modern Japan, cars, cities, television. The world had changed beyond recognition. And yet here I was, still in 1945. Suzuki begged me to surrender. But I told him, I will not surrender until my commanding officer gives me a direct order. He nodded, and then he left, promising to return with my superior. I didn't believe him. Not yet. But something deep inside me stirred. A faint light, a question, a possibility I had buried for 30 years. Could the war truly be over? I didn't know it yet, but the next time I stepped out of the jungle, it would be for the last time. When you live in the jungle for 30 years, silence becomes your companion. The rustle of leaves, the hum of insects, the distant cry of birds, these become your only language. So when I heard the voice of that young man again, calling my name through the trees, it was like hearing a ghost. Norio Suzuki, he called himself, a Japanese traveler. He was smiling, unarmed, wearing bright clothes, not the uniform of any soldier I'd ever seen. At first, I aimed my rifle at him, but he didn't flinch. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "Onoda-san, the war ended in 1945. Japan lost. We have peace now." I wanted to believe him, but belief after 3 decades of doubt felt impossible. He spoke of things that made no sense to me. Tokyo skyscrapers, airplanes that could fly halfway around the world, even color televisions. He showed me a small camera, photographs of his family, and a newspaper with the date, 1974. I stared at it for a long time. My hands trembled. Could it really be true? Had I been fighting a war that ended before he was even born? Still, I couldn't surrender. I told him, I'm a soldier. I will not leave my post until I receive orders from my superior officer. He nodded, calm and respectful. Then he said something I'll never forget. Then I will bring him to you. And he left, disappearing into the jungle path I had walked 1,000 times. Weeks passed. I returned to my routine, patrols, cleaning my rifle, cooking rice. But my heart was restless. For the first time, I felt the jungle closing in. Then one morning, I heard voices again. Not one, but many. I hid among the trees, rifle ready. And there, through the leaves, I saw a figure I had not seen in 30 years. My commanding officer, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi. He was older, gray-haired, dressed not in uniform, but in a simple suit. He called out softly, "Onoda, it's me, your commanding officer. The war is over. You have done your duty." I froze. It was his voice, the same calm tone that had given me orders all those years ago. I stepped forward slowly, my rifle still in hand, shaking. He held out a document, signed, stamped, and official. It read, "In accordance with the Imperial Command, all combat operations are to cease immediately. Onoda Hiroo is relieved of all duties." I took the paper in my hands and stared at it. 30 years of fear, duty, and loneliness crumbled in a single moment. I saluted him. He saluted me back. And then I wept. For the first time in 3 decades, I allowed myself to cry like a man, not a soldier. I handed over my rifle, still clean, still functional, my bayonet, my bullets, and a hand grenade I kept for suicide if capture ever came. The war that had defined my entire life was truly over. They took me down from the mountains. For the first time in decades, I walked on open roads, saw cars, heard music. Children stared at me like I was a ghost, and maybe I was. A ghost from a war they only knew from textbooks. When we reached Manila, cameras flashed everywhere. Journalists surrounded me, asking questions, calling me the soldier who refused to surrender. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt hollow, like a man pulled out of time, still hearing echoes of a world that no longer existed. But when the Japanese ambassador saluted me and said, "Welcome home, Lieutenant Onoda," something inside me finally loosened. For 30 years, I had fought to serve my emperor. Now, I could finally lay down my rifle. When I returned to Japan, everything had changed. The cities, the people, the culture. It was no longer the nation I had left behind. Japan was peaceful, modern, full of life. But for me, peace felt strange. Too quiet. Too empty. For 30 years, I had lived by one rule: never surrender. Now that I didn't know who I was anymore. They called me loyal. They called me stubborn. Some called me a hero. Others called me a fool. But I knew only one truth. I had lived as a soldier, and I had obeyed my orders until the very end. And in that obedience, I found my own kind of peace. When I stepped off the airplane in Tokyo, I expected to feel joy. Instead, I felt lost. The air smelled of gasoline and concrete instead of earth and gunpowder. The people moved fast, heads down, rushing through their days with no awareness of war or duty or sacrifice. Neon lights burned brighter than the stars I'd watched over for 30 years. I was no longer a soldier in the jungle. I was a stranger in my own homeland. Japan had changed. It was no longer the empire I swore to protect. The emperor had become a symbol, not a god. The country had rebuilt itself from ashes, not through battle, but through peace and progress. Children laughed. Factories hummed. The people no longer bowed to soldiers. They bowed to businessmen. And for the first time, I didn't know what to fight for. I met families who thanked me, calling me a patriot. I met others who shook their heads, saying I'd wasted my life. Both were right in their own way. Because while Japan grew and thrived, I had been frozen in time, living by an oath that the world had already forgotten. I tried to adjust. I walked through Tokyo, visiting shrines, watching trains pass by in seconds, faster than my thoughts. Everywhere I went, people recognized me. They'd whisper, "That's him, the man who kept fighting." But I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a ghost who had missed the end of his own story. One day, I visited a school. The teacher asked me to speak to the children. They were bright-eyed, curious, the future of Japan. A boy asked, "Onoda-san, why didn't you give up?" I smiled. It was such an innocent question, but the answer was carved deep in my bones. "Because I made a promise," I said. "A soldier's duty is not to question, but to endure." But as I said the words, I realized something. Enduring isn't the same as living. A few months later, I visited my family's old home. My mother had passed away long before I returned. She'd kept a picture of me on the shrine, praying every day for my safety, never knowing that I was still alive in the jungle, keeping her hope alive with every sunrise. I knelt before that shrine and whispered, "Mother." I came home, and for the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt since the war: peace. I began to write. Books, letters, memories, all the fragments of 30 years lost to duty. People called me the last samurai, a relic of another age. But I didn't mind, because in those 30 years, I had learned the value of patience, of endurance, and of loyalty, not just to a country, but to the human spirit itself. In the years that followed, I moved to Brazil. I lived quietly, far from fame, working on cattle farm. The rhythm of the land reminded me of the jungle. Only this time, the silence wasn't my prison. It was my peace. But I often thought of the young men I left behind in Lubon, those who never made it home. Their voices still echoed in my dreams. Laughter, cries, the whisper of rifles in the night. I promised them I would never forget, and I didn't. When I grew old, journalists still came, asking the same question: "Do you regret not surrendering earlier?" I always answered the same way. Regret is a word for those who didn't believe. I believed in my mission, in my country, in my comrades. That belief kept me alive. Without it, I would have died long ago. I'm not proud of the suffering I caused. nor the years I lost. But I am proud of the man I became, a man who lived by conviction, even when the world forgot him. People today live fast, chasing comfort and pleasure. But sometimes I wonder if they've forgotten what it means to endure. I lived alone in the jungle for 3 decades. Yet I never lost faith, because faith is what keeps the heart beating, even when the world has gone silent. When I close my eyes now, I no longer see war. I see the green canopy of Lubang Island, the place that stole my youth but gave me my purpose. And if I could speak to the world one last time, I'd say this. War is not about killing the enemy. It's about surviving your own doubts. And peace is not the absence of battle. It's the acceptance that you have nothing left to fight but yourself.